the idea that we're talking about today is why you should practice being wrong. And first of all, why people don't want to have the experience of being wrong. And it's a tale of two learning curves. There's sort of this, when you're at school, learning curve. If this is our effort over here and our skill over here, you end up with, if you're in a somewhat decent educational program, with a learning curve that kind of looks like this. And the features of this are that it is sort of roughly going up and to the right at all points. You get a lot of reward out of your initial efforts, right? So if we look here, when you first start, you're learning the basics, your skill in that domain goes up tremendously because you're being guided along, and the basics of almost anything are relatively easy if you have somebody there helping you. So you can see real progress really, really fast. As you move along this curve, for the same amount of effort, you're going to get less skill, and eventually it's going to plateau out. But that sort of gentle learning curve where you're being rewarded at each point, and you learn a lot up front and then it tapers down, is what a structured educational environment is designed to engineer. This is what schools want you to experience. You get better every time you put in effort, and it naturally then tails off. And ultimately, the idea is that once you get into this relatively flat area, if you're up here somewhere, they move you onto a new subject that builds on this, and the process repeats. And so one of the most important features of this is at no point do you ever have to make a mistake. You can have the experience of getting it right at every stage as you're moving sort of up this learning curve, right? From point to point to point, there's somebody there who's guiding you, who's giving you the information that you need to progress, and keeping you sort of on the right track. And so making a mistake in this sort of environment is an indication that something is bad, right? Either your understanding is deficient or your instruction has been deficient. But ultimately what's going to happen is you do some assessment, you have a test, you have a quiz or whatnot, and if you make mistakes on that, you're having a bad time. And that's really unfortunate because that doesn't set you up at all for life, because in the world at large, the acquisition of skill doesn't look anything like that. So a more natural learning curve generally is a sigmoid. So it's flat at the beginning, and then it's exponentially steep for a while, and then it's relatively flat again. And what's happening here is at the start of it, you don't really know anything, right? So you have to put in effort that produces almost no appreciable gain in skill. You just have to be wrong and make mistakes and make mistakes and make mistakes. And then after a little while, you start getting a little bit better. You start making fewer mistakes, you start having more successes, and as you feel out the problem space, something clicks. And suddenly, you're killing it. You're killing it, you're killing it. And you just fly up this exponential section until you hit the next plateau. You slow down, and then you just have a long period of time. Right? And when you hit this next plateau, what happens for the most part in the world is that you don't have just a single learning curve like that. You have a stack of sigmoids. If you enter into some new domain, you have this sort of sigmoid experience, and then you go up, and then you plateau for a while, and then you just have generally, smaller big jumps, but you have a whole sequence of these. And so once you get into, if you get to this point, then you're going to be skilled enough to see what separates you from the people who are better than you. And then you're going to try to attain the mastery that those people who are better than you have. And as you try to perform more and more subtly in this domain, you start making mistakes again. Yay! We're screwing up again, right? But we're screwing up because we're trying to extend ourselves. We're trying to reach this next exponential takeoff window. And then boom, suddenly we're killing it, and then it slows back down again. The acquisition of skill is slower until our knowledge deepens and we can perceive what it looks like. What, now, whereas when we were sitting, say, here, right, we couldn't tell the difference so much between somebody who was here and somebody who was here, right? They were just all people who were better than us. And it's only when we finally move up to this point that we can see what separates people who are here from the people who are on the next plateau, right? And then we can start trying to work our way up and until we finally hit this. And, it might be that there are dozens of plateaus within a domain before you're truly master of whatever skill it is you're trying to acquire. But the point is, all of these red areas, and there would be some down here as well, are places where the only way to progress is to be wrong, is to make a mistake. And so we have to train ourselves to not have a negative emotional experience around being wrong and making a mistake, right? But we went through 12 years of education where we were doing this. We were doing this artificial learning curve, and where mistakes are bad. Mistakes are forbidden. Mistakes mean you're a bad person. You're going to get held back a grade. You're going to get yelled at when you get home because you got an F on the test. And so we have 12 years of training that cuts us off from the natural, intuitive process of mastery that exists anytime you have to grapple with the world as it is instead of an artificial, constructed, scaffolded learning experience. So if you're picking up new skills at work, or if you're trying to take up a new hobby or something like that, you're going to be over here. You're going to be having this experience of having to spend some time getting no appreciable reward for your efforts, and then having suddenly small rewards appear, and then boom, you take off. Does that make sense so far?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like this is all making sense. It's actually really funny because I'm in my brain relating it to Rocket League because of that fact of it's just like, oh, when you first start playing and you're playing these competitive games, it just feels bad when you're losing and you're just like, I'm losing and this isn't fun. But then it's like once you actually start recognizing like, oh, what do I need to actually do to win these games? And you start leveling up and you make some progress. And then it's like you hit that next batch of people who are even better than you. And Rocket League has some of those kind of clear delineations where it's like early on, all you have to do is just have your rotation down, be defending the goal, be able to go back to the goal, don't chase the ball around, and you're just going to start winning games. And then it becomes that thing of, oh, now you need to be able to actually challenge and see where someone's doing and predict where the ball is going based on how they're hitting it. And then it just ends up and you don't realize, you just think people are better than you, like you were saying. But then it's like, oh, you get this skill down and it gets you higher. And then you go like, oh, but these people above me, now I need to be able to fly to get to this next tier.
Exactly.
Oh, now I need to be able to dribble while I'm in the air to get to this next tier. And you start being able to identify the steps, but it takes a long time and a lot of knowledge and messing up before you even start recognizing what that staircase is that you're climbing.
Exactly. And so the way that we transition from being trained over here, never to make a mistake, to being skilled at engaging with the world out there in an unstructured environment and embracing mistakes as a method of rapidly generating the data that our brains need to acquire skill, generally is going to be pick up a difficult hobby. So I got super lucky in my early life. I started playing the game Go for no reason. I just saw a webcomic that made a reference to it and said, what is that? And in the Go community, they have a proverb that is, lose your first 50 games as quickly as possible. This is one of the most useful things that I've ever heard in my life as far as acquiring mastery of any skill. Because what it says is go out and actively seek failure. Because there's no other way to begin generating the information that your brain needs. And so, because somebody who is clearly more experienced than you is telling you this proverb, you can begin to trust that this might actually be something that's worth doing. I play video games, so I play Rocket League. And Rocket League has this exact same thing, where you can actually go and look at your rating and the history of your rating, and you see this exact plateau effect, where, it's not that you steadily improve. It's you are Diamond 3 for 6 months, and then you're Champ 2. What happened in between? It's been 1 week since you were Diamond 3, now you're Champ 2. You've gone up, 8 grades or whatever that is in separation. And it's because of the fact that this is an unexplored domain. There isn't the structured environment available for it. You have to figure it out yourself. And anything that you have to figure out yourself is going to have this stacked sigmoid learning curve. And you have to be willing to embrace those red periods, those periods where you're making mistakes. So this is, anytime you're in one of these spaces, you're being wrong. So embrace it. Learn to view being wrong and making mistakes as a necessary and welcome first step in acquiring mastery. And shake off the tendency to try to put off making a mistake for as long as possible, because that's what we've all been trained to do. The ideal that we're taught in our education is ultimately never make a mistake, right? When I'm teaching my students mathematics, the single hardest thing for me to get students to do, even gifted, capable students, is just to try something. It's notorious with factoring. When you're first learning to factor, it's like, well, how can I do this? And it's like, there's not a quick way to get the right answer guaranteed. There's an exhaustive way to factor. It takes forever. So much faster than that is just to plug some numbers in there and make a guess, because there's an asymmetry that people aren't aware of, because our educational system doesn't really talk about it nearly enough, at the very least. Sometimes in English class you'll hear it, but it's that it's far easier for a human brain to analyze something that is known to be wrong and figure out what's wrong with it and how to fix it than it is to generate a solution that is correct whole cloth. Because to generate a correct solution, you have to hold the whole problem in your working memory and find that, that narrow path where every component of it is correct. Whereas if you have something that's clearly wrong, you can zero in on what about this is wrong. And it's highly likely that the actual wrong part, the choice that was made that makes this an incorrect solution, will fit in your working memory. And you can address it constructively. So if you just, in mathematics, one of the best problem-solving tips is literally wishful thinking. You just say, what would be the nicest thing that could be true about this problem? And you write it down. And when you write it down, you very often find it's wrong, but it's actually only wrong in a small way. I think the most famous example of that is the physicist Paul Dirac. Supposedly, when he was trying to merge the Schrödinger equation, which is the wave equation in quantum mechanics, with Einstein's special relativity, he just went, well, what would be the nicest, and wrote it down and was like, oh, I think this is actually right. Nobel Prize.
That's kind of amazing.
But most of the time, we don't get that lucky. Most of the time, we write down a solution and it's wrong, and we look at it and go, oh, but if I just... And there it is. We can find the solution. I have not always followed this advice. So I tell my students this all the time. Right? For years I've been saying, just write something down. Just get anything out there, make some mistake, because you can usually fix it faster than you can sit here in paralysis trying to dream up the correct solution right out the gate. I had a problem that I was working on, just recreational math problem, and it was about the intersection of some hyperbola, which is like one of those thingies that goes like this, with a parabola, which is the one that goes like this, right? And so it was, okay, where do these, what are the coordinates of this crossing? It's an early question in a book on modern algebra. And I did the thing where I was like sitting there and I was looking at it, and I worked, recreational math, right? I worked on this for 3 weeks and made no progress because I was trying to think this problem through and come to a solution. And I finally one day, I had a student who texted me and said, I'm going to be 10 minutes late. I'm sitting in a cafe and I pull out this problem and I'm like, well, what's the dumbest solution that's possible, right? Well, the simplest parabola is 1 over x. Or sorry, the simplest hyperbola is 1 over x. The simplest parabola is x squared. So what if I just set those two things equal to each other? If I have 1 over x is equal to x squared, right? And it wasn't just, they didn't give me the things. It was trying to find what parabola and hyperbola to select to make the intersection have some property. I can't remember exactly. But I was like, what if this was the answer? And it wasn't. It was wrong. And it turned out the answer was this. I just had to put a 3 in there. And as soon as I got to this point, I was like, oh yeah, that can't be right, because it doesn't match this criterion I've been given. But as soon as I asked the follow-up question, well, how doesn't it match it? It was like, oh, it's just out by a factor of 3. Stick that 3 in there. That's the worst 3 of all time. Stick that 3 in there, and we're good to go. One of the things that's really interesting about sort of that experimental, mistake-driven learning that we do in the natural world versus the learning that happens in a classroom is you can take this privileged road in a classroom, right? You have somebody who's keeping you on the path at all times. And so if you're here, say this is going to be the classroom experience, and the goal is up here, right? You might wander off a little bit, but you get corrected and you take a relatively straight route to get to the goal, right? So there's some problem that's set for you and you're given the techniques to address that problem, and you're given a bunch of toy examples to practice on, and then you might be given a slightly complicated example to assess you. But if you're out in the world and the goal's there and you're starting here, what usually happens is you wander off in completely the wrong direction and you go nowhere. That's your mistake, right? And then you wander off some other way and you hit a dead end. That's your mistake. But what eventually starts happening, you build up this big body of all of these and you're sort of groping your way towards the problem, or towards the solution. But eventually something really magic happens, which is that you go off somewhere and you realize, yeah, this is a mistake, but you actually find out how to recover from it and still achieve the goal. And that process of recovery is what makes this kind of learning so much more robust than what you get in a classroom. The point where you can say, oh, look, I've ended up over here and this isn't where I want to go, but I can pivot out of this. And is this more effort than taking, the wonderful narrow road? Yes. But sometimes life forces us off of this narrow road. And another situation is, if we've explored all of these ways to recover over here, we've explored this kind of space, and then somebody comes over to us and says, okay, but what if we want to go to this goal? Then the person who learned experimentally is going to be able to go from one of their many mistaken paths and make a quick detour and make their way to the new goal. Whereas this person over here, if they're offered this new goal, the whole of their experience is so far away from that goal that gap is going to be too much to be bridged, because they don't have the experience of groping around, right? Even if this person can't find a quick way to pivot, they can probably start groping their way over that way, because they have that experience of just wandering about and eventually find a new solution that they can, at the very least, recover from. And given enough time, they'll find that nice straight path, right? But this person who just sat here in that structured environment with that very kind learning curve, where their effort is always rewarded because they're always being guided down the straight path towards the solution. As soon as you try to ask them to solve a problem that they haven't been shown the solution path before, they just lock up. They panic. And so the real world problem solving, every one of those mistakes that we make pays dividends. And that's why that exponential takeoff happens, right? Because eventually what happens is you realize, I want to go somewhere over here. I want to attain something that's further than my original goal. And I have the skills to begin working my way over here. And I might have to, screw up a bunch of times, but I can do it. And I have the emotional wherewithal to deal with it. So I can always navigate my own course. Whereas over here, if somebody very kindly comes along and gives you a goal over here and shows you exactly how to do it, then you can do it. But very often what I see is students who, straight A students. And you ask them to do something a little bit different than what's in the textbook, and they just come undone. And it's really upsetting to them. And it's really, as an educator, to me, that feels like really unkind to do that to people. To have somebody spend years of their life being told that they are learning, and then they come away without any skills. All they can do is repeat the things that they've already done before. But never give them an opportunity to develop the sort of robust ability to engage with unknown domains that allows them to find their way in the world when life offers them challenges that are, more vexing than the things they've already been shown. So this is another piece of, why that structured classroom environment is really setting people up for failure, because they just don't get the opportunity to experience their mistakes, to explore all of the potentially recoverable situations you can end up off of that narrow path. And because they never learn the process of recovering from a mistake, they're not able to dynamically explore the problem space themselves. They can only do the things that they've already been shown how to do. And that's just not a very useful skill in life. Ultimately, if you don't get out there and grapple with stuff and make mistakes, you're not going to be able to apply any of the stuff you've learned in a constructive way. The reason that this matters is we have this lifetime of training that we can't make mistakes, right? Making a mistake is bad. You get in trouble. You get a bad grade. You get grounded when you get home. You have to have a parent-teacher conference, whatever, right? In addition to that, making mistakes, we're trained as embarrassing, right? It's something you don't want other people to know about. that's really, really problematic because in life, some of the most important junctures that you will have professionally and socially are when you have made a mistake and you have to face the consequences of it. Because, when you screw up at work, how you manage the fallout of that situation can have tremendous implications for your career. When you screw up in a relationship or even just a friendship, how you manage the fallout of that can have tremendous consequences for your social life, right? So at the most critical junctures, I'm writing it down. I don't know why. I just feel like I should be making use of this. The most critical junctures are often those situations where we are discovered to be wrong. I know this is very compelling. So we're discovered to be wrong. If we keep that in mind, right, that our ability to maintain our poise, our ability to recover gracefully in situations where we are found to be wrong, is a critical piece of navigating our professional and our interpersonal lives. It would be really good to be skilled and poised in those moments. Recovering from a mistake and managing the emotional response to a mistake is a skill, in the same way that anything else that we do in life is a skill. And so what we really don't want is to, because of our educational training, be before that first big takeoff in the skill of being wrong. So if you are going through your life trying your best to avoid mistakes, which is an impossible task, right? If you are sitting right here at the moment that you screw up at work, you have no skill for managing the emotional and interpersonal fallout of that situation. If you immediately go into a panic, right, and begin behaving counterproductively in that moment, you're going to take this incredibly important juncture in your life and you're going to blow it. Because you're not ready for the stress, you're not ready for the emotional repercussions, you're not ready for the fight or flight experience because you've spent a whole life avoiding acquiring this skill. So if instead you build habits of actively seeking out opportunities to make mistakes or opportunities to have the experience of being wrong, if you do that at least enough to get up this first hump, right, to at least progress so that you are here, right? You get to that first plateau, and we're sure that, you could be super good at making mistakes if you wanted to, but one of the things about these sort of stacked sigmoid learning curves is that, subsequent humps, the gaps, very often aren't super huge, right? Like the actual reward for pushing through plateaus is not necessarily super great in terms of performance. You might be able to get 60-70% off of that first jump. And being here, when you're at that critical juncture in your life, when you just screwed up in your interpersonal or work life, being there and being able to remain poised, remain calm, being able to own up to the mistake because you're not embarrassed about it, because you have the experience of being wrong publicly, because you don't go into counterproductive behaviors and just say like, hey guys, I screwed this up. Here's what I'm doing to fix it. Will get you so much towards navigating those junctures in a constructive way. Because we all know on some level that everybody screws up sometimes. And most people are willing to forgive somebody who owns their mistakes. But we hate somebody who refuses to acknowledge their mistakes. It is true. Universally, the person who is most reviled is the person who refuses to admit when they are wrong. But if you are a person who consistently admits when they're wrong, who points out to others when they've made a mistake, if you have that as people's assessment of you, oh yeah, Steve over there, he's always the first one to say when he's screwed up. People are going to cut you a lot of slack. They're going to give you a lot of leeway in those moments because we all know that they're unpleasant. So if you can practice this skill enough to at least get up this first exponential growth, reach the point where you have the ability to maintain your composure in the face of being discovered to be wrong, so much of life is going to be smoothed out. It's going to be so much more pleasant. Mistakes definitely happen. The moments where you make mistakes are some of the most important moments in your life, professionally and personally. If you can navigate them with poise, you're going to have a much better time. So, how do we practice that? We got to find opportunities to be wrong. My favorite approach to this is literally I just go to the Ask Science subreddit. Because this is a place where people are giving answers in their domains of expertise. Right? So somebody asks a question. When you click into that thread, you're going to see 10 answers by people with PhDs in exactly this discipline. Right? They are the folks who have gone through multiple of this stacked sigmoid sort of learning process. So I look at the question and I say, what do I think is true here? And I actually sit down and work through what would be my reply. Get it nailed down. And then click on that discussion and find out how flippin' wrong I am. Almost every time. Sometimes I vaguely know, a rough answer. But in detail, there's always at least one mistake. There's always at least something that's wrong with my answer when it's compared with the experts. And so it's just every day. Log in, rather than reading some political thread or some world events thread that's going to totally bring me down, I can go to the Ask Science threads and find out how wrong I am. Yeah! But because I'm seeking that out and I'm practicing it, it works out. And another great way to deal with this, this is managing embarrassment in general, is just tell people stories where you come off poorly. Just normalize for yourself and for your social network situations where you fell short. This is something that I've been overtly practicing for many years. It's like I tell all of my embarrassing stories. At every opportunity, because if making a mistake, screwing something up, and being embarrassed is sort of transmuted into an opportunity to make somebody laugh and to provide a benefit to people, it gives you at least an anchor point in that moment of discovering that you're wrong. You're like, well, this is going to be a funny one, right? It's just some way to have a little leverage to pivot from. And again, it's building that social capital of being viewed as a person who is comfortable acknowledging their mistakes and situations where they come off the worst, which buys you a lot when you're talking about dealing with the repercussions of being discovered to be wrong. So that's the second level.